Hello everyone, here I'm continuing with the installation of the doors into the texture, or the door panels rather. And I've had some issues with the UV map, so I'm checking out to make sure I know where I'm putting the door. And if you'll recall, I made a mistake in how I was going to fix the UV map of the sides because I didn't change its alignment with the rest of the UV map. So it's very, very strange. I'm having to Control M and then click Y to flip it, mirror it vertically. I forgot to mention that procedure earlier, but the main thing is you have to remember that your whole material is selected, not just part of it. And the same thing goes when you assign the texture, which was another problem I had. Now here I'm adjusting where the texture is supposed to be. At first, of course, it didn't appear, but now it's appearing just fine. But its size is wrong. The reason it didn't appear, of course, was that it was not assigned properly. It wasn't assigned to the whole material. But here I am going to work between GIMP and Blender, changing its scale to roughly fit the real thing. It will never be perfect because, as I mentioned in the last video, I haven't modeled the door sills, which changes the whole proportion of the door, actually. So this is a compromise. This is not going to be perfect at all. Another thing is that the interior of the real-life door and door panel is slightly curved, whereas here it's flat, which is another issue. It's a matter of compromise in this. I am trying to put a fair amount of detail into this model, but this is by no means the most detailed model you could build of a Vega interior. Again, having the actual drawings or having the actual car would help immensely in making this more accurate. The scale is both a compromise and a guess. So here I'm changing the scale of the door again, and again, and again. Trying to make it shorter, basically, because the door handle is too far back. And in turn, the whole door panel is too far back. It's a little bit better there. I'm going to mess with the perspective a little bit, but not before I try this in the actual model. So our second test texture will be made by getting rid of the transparencies again, exporting as a targa, and then loading to both the UV editor and the materials editor in Blender. So UV editor, upload, I guess I skipped the materials editor that time, but normally you have to do it that way. A little bit better, but still too far forward. So there, I actually uploaded to the materials editor, just to be sure. Still doesn't work. So back to GIMP. Fiddle with the scale a little bit more before we do the perspective. Move it again. Save it again. Save it again. Now another test texture. This is a very tedious process. I haven't even gotten to fixing the perspective yet. Export again, replace again, export. Back to Blender again. Back to the UV editor again. Upload to the UV editor. You can tell I'm dubbing this in later. Forgotten how difficult this all was. Upload to the materials editor. This time I didn't forget. And it's a bit better, actually. But it's still not quite where it needs to be. Not quite. Because you can see the front end of the wood panel needs to be much further in, and the window crank as well. I'm using that photo of a 73 Vega, which is pretty close to a 71. Not exactly the same, but close enough. So now the perspective, finally. And the perspective will not be perfect. It's a given. Because I don't have the correct drawings, and the door sill is not modeled correctly. The door isn't curved enough. There are all kinds of issues with this. So all of this is a compromise. Settle on that, move it into a better position. And that is quite distorted. It's much too tall. But this is in proportion to the UV map, so we'll see how it looks in the actual model. Little bit of adjustment there. Now it's even more stretched out. I'll have to see how good this turns out to be. Scale again. That's a little bit better. Perspective, adjustment again. It's a teeny tweak. And save it again, export again, same as before. Upload the new texture to the UV editor. Take a look without bothering with the materials editor this time. Go back and we'll settle on this version even though it's far from ideal. Eventually you just have to stop, of course. So move it into the position of the other door panel and we just flip it vertically. And then we have our second door panel because the designs are the same on the Vega. Notice the UV map isn't a perfect match, but as you'll see on the model, you don't really notice, actually. It's not enough of a difference to matter. You see, it's slightly different. Here we have to export, same as before. And then we load it up to the UV editor. Whereas technically there, I'm making a bit of a mistake because I haven't selected the UV map. Now as you'll see, still more or less right. So I guess that's it. Thanks for watching.